Good afternoon, Yiddelach. Checking in. It's going to be the first chapter for the laws of the Rambam in Hilchot Nedarim. It's going to be the laws of vows, a little bit different than the laws of oaths, although they are somewhat similar. Since today is the first Perek, the Rambam's probably going to go into it pretty well and explain pretty clearly. So let's see what we have. Hilchot Nedarim. Yesh b'kol shalosh mitzvah, shtei mitzvahs aseh v'achas mitzvahs lo aseh v'zehu pratan. Generally speaking, there's three mitzvahs, two positive, one negative. Alef, shishmor motzis fasav asek moshe nadar, that he should be careful what he says and make sure he does anything he vows. Beis, shelo yachal devaru. Two, not to desecrate his word. Three, sheyufar haneder or shvua zehu denafar nevarim hafarish b'torsh ksav. And if he wants to nullify it, he should do it the way the Torah expresses. Uber mitzvos elu, b'parakim elu. And we're going to explain how all this works in the upcoming chapter. So halacha alef is Perek alef. Haneder nechlak l'shtei machlekos. A vow is divided into two parts. There's two types. Hachelik harishon. What's the first type? Hu sheyesa adam al atzmo. Somebody forbids things that are for permitted to him. Could go in, for example, Shiyomar Paris Medina Plonis Asurin Alai Shloshim Yom, that certain fruits that he can eat from a certain place will be usher to him for 30 days, or Oilam, or even forever. Or Min Ploni Beperos Oilam, or a certain type of fruit, or Peros Elu Asurin Alai, or a certain, just these, he could designate a certain actual specific fruits, like a basket of fruit that's in front of him, those particular fruits. Koloshin Yishasar, and any type of binding language, then they're usher to him. Sham Shavuot Klal, even though there's no Shavua here, Velo Hazkar Shem, Velo Kinoi, and we didn't mention Hashem. Also, Namar Batars Lesser Yisrael al Nafshay, and the Torah just says that a person can place an Isra on his nefesh, on his soul. Shesar Latzma Devar Mutarim, that he ushers permitted things to himself. So the language is very loose. He just has to say these things are asr. These are going to be called vows of Isser. Halakha base. So we saw in Halakha alef the language can be very general, and he doesn't necessarily have to mention Hashem, and he has the ability to usher something on himself. The idea is something that's normally permitted, he made usher to himself. Base, Vehelak Asheni, what's the second type? He obligates himself to bring a certain offering. He says he'll bring an oila, or he'll bring a burnt offering, he'll bring a peace offering, or mincha offering, or Hari Behem is oila, or shlami, or he designates a certain animal. And when he says this word alai, that's what we call a vow. That seems to be a key word for us. Omer Hari Zu, Vahomer Hari Zu, Hari Nikr Nadava. That's called a Nadava. Let's see what the difference between these two languages is. The first one, he says, the language was on him. He said, I obligate myself, so that's a neder. If he puts the language on the animal, this animal, then that's called a donation. And they're very similar. What's the only difference is that when it comes to a neder, if he puts it on him, then if the animal gets lost, he has to replace it. But if he puts it on the animal, he makes a gift, then even if it gets lost, he would not have to replace it. What else do we have? How do you know? The Torah says, Torah says in the vows that you will vow and your gift offerings. In this category, I want to call vows of sanctification. So we see them clearly mentioned in the Torah. And so the Rambam is referring to the cursed category as vows of Isser, the second as vows of sanctification. Alright, the first category, vows of prohibition, the second, vows of sanctification. First one, these fruits I won't eat. Second one, obligates himself to bring an animal that the Torah didn't obligate him to bring. Gimel, v'dinei chachelek harishain, and let's talk about the first category. What are the laws? V'nyanu Hem she'anu mavirim halachas elu. The Rambam is going to explain. V'dinei dari hektish mishpatehem. But when it comes to the second category, kul mizbarobim koimon, they'll be explained in their place. But hilchos ma'aser karbonos, they'll be explained in the laws of carbon. So in this chapter of Rambam, he's only going to talk about the first type of vow, which is vows of prohibition. Dalid. It's a positive commandment of the Torah that a person should fulfill what he says. Either type of vow. Like the Torah says. There's a few verses in Torah that says you can do what you say. So it makes it pretty clear. Halacha hey. So Dala was just to bring the Torah supports that says a person's obligated through his speech. Halacha hey, ha'asar asmo min memine Michael, somebody who utters a certain food to himself. Gon she'amar te'enim asurim alav. This guy picked, I think, figs. Yep. Or te'enim shel medina plonis asurin alav, or te'enim elu asurin alav, or kiyotze be'elu, or something like that. V'achol man kol shehu, and he ate a little bit. Lokum in the Torah, he gets lashes. He gets biblical lashes from the Torah, even if he eats just a tiny amount, because he violated his vow. How do you know? V'lomer yo yochel. Because it says it shouldn't profane your word. Shein l'darim shir. And when it comes to a vow, there's no measure. When it comes to most prohibitions, especially with food and drink, there's a certain measure a person has to eat to be violating the commandment. And even though if he were to eat less, it's not viewed very positively, and there may be a certain rabbinic retribution. There wouldn't be biblical retribution. But we see here by vows that even by the tiniest amount, he would have to undergo, God forbid, biblical lashes, because there's no measure to a vow. There's no minimum measure. Shekol another Midavar harizeh k'mafarish kol shehu. It's just even the tiniest amount. Amar achila meperes medina polonis asurin alai, or achila meperes elu, and alochal shel achu kazayis. But if he changes the language a little bit, and he says, eating from an eating of the fruits from this country are usher to me, or an eating of the fruits of this country, of these particular fruits. Now he didn't put it so much. He emphasized the word eating. And what does it mean, a real eating? The Torah doesn't obligate a person on an eating unless he takes an olive-sized portion, which is the typical minimum amount. So it's one thing if he designates just the fruits. I won't eat these. This person says, I won't eat these fruits at all. Or I'm sorry, if he says these fruits are forbidden to me, then even the tiniest amount is going to make him a problem. It's like he stated it explicitly, but if he says to eat, or if he brings the word eating in there, then it's not usher to him. He didn't violate his vow until he actually eats. Until you biblical eating, he has to eat it kazayas. Halacha vav. Asar atzmo achilas min te'enim ve'achilas min hanavim. What if he ushers on himself? What if he takes a vow against figs and grapes? Ben neder achad ben shnei darim. Whether he did it in one or two vows. Hayleinu mitzarfen lekazayas. They would combine to make the kazayas v'kol hiyotzi b'zeh. So if he used the language of eating in his vow, and he included either in one vow grapes and figs, or in two separate vows grapes and figs, then if he were to eat half the minimum Torah portion of either and the required, well, then it's possible that the half amount of grapes and the half amount of figs, if he were to eat them, they would combine. I'm not sure if it has to be a Torah dika eating in terms of the amount of time he takes to eat it. Like, I'm not sure if he eats figs on Tuesday and grapes on Thursday, if that still combines. Normally it has to be Kedei Achilas Pras, which is a pretty short amount of time, which I think the amount of time to swallow 3 eggs or eat half a loaf of bread. Something that's a very small shear, like, I don't know, 6-8 minutes or so. 3-6-8 minutes. So I'm not sure about that, but we do see that certainly if we were to eat them back to back, half an hour's worth of grapes and half an hour's worth of figs, it would combine, and he would be subject to biblical lashes. God forbid. Halacha Zayin, Homer Peres Elalai Carbon. He says, these fruits are on me for an offering. Let's see what that means. Or Amar Hari Hain Carbon. He says they're an offering. Or Shamar Lachavero Koma Shachal Imachalai Carbon. He says, anything I eat with you, to me it'll be a carbon, or cook carbon, or he says like a carbon, or Hari Hain Alai Carbon, or he says they're a carbon. Hari Elo is Surin Alav. This type of, I think the Rambam is going into a different type of language. If a person says a certain type of fruit is like a offering to him, like it's hektish to him, then it does become usher to him. Carbon, because it's possible that a person could vow a carbon. Shahaisachol carbon v'aser. And he should make a behema that it should fall on it a carbon, it should become aser. Let's see a little more clearly what we said. I'm not exactly sure how this works here. There's a note number 9. Just like a person can't partake of a sacrifice until it's offered, so he can't take of any entity forbidden by a vow. Just like the consecration of a sacrifice comes about because of his vow, and it causes it to become forbidden, so too a vow causes any entity to be forbidden. So a person vows a certain animal, a lot of times they'll get to eat some of it, but not until it's offered. So he, so to speak, has made the animal usher to him until he's able to bring it. And when he says it by these fruits, they become usher to him in the same way the animal would be. It's another type of language a person could use to bring a vow, to obligate himself in a vow of prohibition. Halacha hes, havalom or peres elo alai, or min ploni alai, umasha achali ploni alai. But if he says any of those cases, but he says it's like pig to me, or go with azar, like idol worship, or knevelos atrefos, or other types of trefos, then they're permitted to him. That does not turn it into a vow. Because you can't make grapes into a pig, and you can't make whatever else you might be involved in into a pig. Either God made it a pig or he didn't. So those things aren't possible. But when he said to the fruits that they're like a carbon, a person has it in his ability to turn something profane into an offering. So he has now turned these fruits into an offering, so they're forbidden to him until that, so to speak, if they could be offered, then he might be able to eat some of them. Whether he could do that or not, I'm not too sure. I don't think so. I don't know. But in the same way, it's the classic case if he designate an animal as an offering, it'd be forbidden to him until he offered it. So since he has it in his power to make the profane holy, that language works. But since he doesn't have it in his power to turn grapes into a pig or into a nevela or a trefa or an avodah zarah, a person could make grapes into avodah zarah. But since he doesn't have his power to transform it into a false god, literally, then they're not usher to him. Well, at least by the pig and the veils and trefas, it's obvious how the avodah zarah works. Maybe it'll be discussed more at length. Halakha tes zeklal. Here's the general rule when it comes to this stuff. Kol hamesim devarim mutarim devarim asurim im osa davar asur yachal asosa beneder harel asurim. Anything that was mutter and he wants to make it like it's usur, if it's a davar asur that he's able to make through a vow, then it's usur to him. If he can't do it, harel mutarim. And then he can't, then it stays mutter to him. A vow has a certain amount of power. A person can make certain things usur to him, and certain things a person can make. If he wants to make something permitted seem forbidden, if the vow can do it, it does. But if he can't make it forbidden, then it remains permitted. Not sure if that's a general rule for what we learned up until this point or a general rule for going forward. Earlier we said that a person has to take a vow in a language that he has the power to endow that thing with a certain level of forbiddenness. And if he does, it becomes a real vow, and if not, not. And here we're saying just whether he has in his power at all to make it forbidden through the power of a vow, then it is forbidden, if not, not. We'll see more. Halacha Yud. How about a sin offering or a guilt offering? Even though they can't be as a vow or a free will offering, like it'll be explained in its place. Efshar, it's possible to vow to bring them on account of a vow. Let's see how that works. Shehanoider ben Nazir, someone who makes a Nazirite vow, that's a vow not to cut his hair or partake of any grape or wine products for a period of time, and not to become impure from the dead. And I hope I'm not leaving it out. It's an extra level of sanctity. He stays away from wine and any grapes, and grows his hair long, and can't become impure from a corpse. And its additional level of holiness, the Torah juxtaposed against the portion of the Sota, the suspected adulteress, teach that wine can lead to very improper conduct, and that's why the two portions are next to each other. But how about someone who made that, such a vow, maybe a chatas, and now he's going to bring his sin offering, I think because he didn't enjoy some of God's creations for a period of time, meaning the wine, he owes a sin offering for that. Im nitman, if he becomes impure, maybe asham kamoisbar, and if he becomes impure, he has to bring a guilt offering. So someone who says these fruits to me are like a chata, so asham are like a guilt offering. Shamar hari hein chatas, and he says they are a chatas. Asham, they are an asham hari elu surin, they are actually aser. And Sarik Loma Baomer Harihain Olo Ishlamim Umincha Oitoida. And I don't even have to tell you if he says any of the other types of offerings, Shahain Asurin, they're Asurin Shakol Elu, Bain Benetter Nadava, because those can for sure come as a Netter Nadava. So certain offerings, it's no problem to bring them as a Netter and a vow or a free will offering in the first place, but a person might think a guilt or a sin offering that the Torah obligates him to bring can't be transformed into a vow type offering. But we see that the Nazarite who is the classical type of vow, that he does bring these types of offerings. So to use that type of language, it's also acceptable because it relates back to the Nazir, who these are vow style offerings, as we see that the Nazir brings them. So to say these type of things, it also works to obligate the person, and the entities become forbidden to him. Yud alef aval omer peres elalai kachalas Aaron. But someone who says these fruits to me are like the challah brought to Aaron, the high priest, like truma, or like his truma, are elu mutari, and then it stays mutar she'ein sham derech lahavi elu v'neder and dava, because it's see what we got. The video's back. Alright, so hopefully you could hear me through that. If someone says certain fruits are like the challah for the high priest or like the truma for the high priest, it stays permitted. Shein sham derech lahavi elu v'neder dava, because no way do those ever get brought as vows or donations. The Torah obligates a person to bring truma, to give it to the Kohen and to give the challah to the Kohen, and it's never brought as an offering. It always goes straight to the Kohen. But oftentimes, God forbid, the Torah will obligate a person in a guilt or sin offering, and he has to bring it, but it can be brought, it is sometimes brought as a vow, so that language works. So the majority of the offerings work. It seems like almost all the offerings work, but to say challah or truma does not work. Yud Beis Haomer Hari Aperos Elalai Kin Noiser. If someone says these fruits are like noser, that's an offering that was left beyond its designated time, or pigel, the priest offered it with an intent to have it eaten outside the appropriate specs for time and place. Kivasa Tamea Shel Kachim, or he says it's like impure, like a carbon that's become like an offering that's become impure. They are forbidden to him. Shahari asan kivsar carbon mikol makom, because he has made it like sacrificial meat. So if he says notar pigol or impure meat, it is forbidden because it did at least become like a carbon. There's a few notes here. Okay, now the notes just explain we said that notar is left over after its prescribed time, and pigel is offered with the intent was eaten at a time was forbidden. I thought also place, but it doesn't say that here. And we see by the truma and the challah for the priest that his will is irrelevant. But when it comes to a neder, when it comes to a Nazarite vow, we see his will is involved because he's going to be bringing those offerings based on his own free will. The Torah didn't obligate him. He obligated himself with a vow. Okay. So even though a person can't, we said earlier, a person can't turn fruits into a pig. That's true. A person also can't turn fruits technically into notar or pigel, but he can make the profane holy. And since notar and pigel were once holy items, endowed with a certain holiness and a certain level of restriction, that could have come about through his starting it off by making it holy, then we'll pick up on that one aspect if he uses this language, and these things will also be forbidden to him. He's also said as if they were a holy offering, which he is empowered to do, and now he's lost his right to eat of them. Halacha Gimel, Ha'omer Hari Hein Alaikim Meiser Behema. What if he says they're like Meiser, Hari Asuri, and there are Asur, Hoyo Kedusham B'dei Adam, because a person, so in a person's power to make Meiser. We'll explain that in a minute. Hari Hein Alai Kivchor, if he says they're like a firstborn, Hari Mutarin, they are permitted. She'ain Kedusham B'dei Adam, because that's not in the hands of a person. And Yochel Asfisa Beneder, and he can't really grasp it. He can't designate it with the neder. Shenamar bo lo yidish ish oisa, because it says a man can't do it. It says clearly in Pasuk. So it seems the key is what's within his power and what's within his will to designate or not designate. So, as when the new flock comes out, all the little shepselas run under stick, and number 10 gets a little tag, and he's for Hashem. And a person tags the number 10 and makes it holy, so that's sort of within his power. But the firstborn that comes out of the womb, that really has nothing to do with him, and that's how Hashem made it, so that would not be an effective language for a vow. So how does it play out? If he uses the language like the tithe for the behemoth, the entity does become forbidden, so that's within his power. And if he says like a firstborn, it stays permitted because that's not within his power. Yud Dalid. Well, it's a long chapter. Try to pick up the pace a little here. Amar Hari Hein Alai Shemayim. What if he says they're like a devotion offering from above? Hari Hein Asurin. They're also Shecham Shemayim Levitic bias, because it could apply to improving the temple. Hari Hein Alai Trumas Halishcha. If he says they're like a vow for a certain part of the temple, for the certain chamber, Ketmidim, or for an everyday offering, or Kadirim, or they're like Kadirim, storage rooms, or Ke'etzim, or like the wood for the offering, or Ke'ishim, or like the fire offerings, Kimizbeach, or like the altar, or Ke'echad Mishamshi Izbeach, or something that's used on the altar. Let's see what it says. Kagon Sha'amar Hari Hein Alai Ki Yaim, they're like altar rakes, or Kimizrachos. The ewers for the blood of the sacrifices. I don't even know what that is in English. Or Mizlagos, the forks, Kiyotze Behen, because the priest had to attend to the offerings. It was a big holy social barbecue there. You had to, as holy as it was, there's still a certain physical aspect that had to be dealt with. The ashes and the wanted to burn properly, and a lot of implements involved. If he says it like the chamber, Yerushalayim, like Jerusalem, Hari Ein L'Surim, they all are usher. Carbon, even though he never mentioned a carbon, Shekol Nevarim Elu, all these things, Yan Komer Hari carbon. It's like set of carbon. So they're not technically an offering, but what are they? The one was he said it should be like money used to improve the temple. Or donations for the chamber, the daily sacrifices, which that's also not in his power, the storage rooms. None of these things are technically offerings which he can make happen. And all these utensils are obviously not technically offerings. It's still very, very similar because they're all things used for sanctification and for holy things. So we all understand that he's endowing it with a certain power of holiness. As far as the fire offerings go, those are the portions offered on the temple altar. Must also be out of his portion. We'll have to check that out of his scope of what he can and does not designate, to check that up. But anyway, all these things, even though they're not specifically offerings, it's clear that he's trying to indicate he's trying to indicate a certain holy intent, that he wants a level of holiness to fall on whatever he's referring to, and we understand them to mean that they are holy to him. They become sanctified to him in the sense that he can no longer partake of them, and he would be obligated if he were to eat them, God forbid. Tezvav, Hay Lefanav Basar Kodesh. What if there's holy sacrificial meat in front of him? Even if it's from a Thanksgiving offering after the blood was sprinkled, where now a common person could eat it. And he says such the fruit. Let's say fruits. The Ram doesn't say. He says they're like this particular meat. And they are aser shelo hisvi bikaro, because he's only really grabbing the main point shahaya aser, which is that it's aser. See how that works. Avalim haya basar b'chor, but if it's the meat of the firstborn, if it's before the sprinkle little blood, when no one can eat it, hari aser, then it's aser. Then it's a muter. But if it's after the blood, then it would be muter. So with the shlamim, which people can eat after its blood was sprinkled, since fundamentally before it was sprinkled, it couldn't be forbidden. The meat was forbidden. That's how we look at it. We don't take into the fact that later it became permitted. We say that fundamentally this meat was forbidden, and it's apparently an interesting question discussed at length in the Gemara Nedarim, page Yud Alef Amud Beis. But if it was for a firstborn, then for sure, before the blood's sprinkled, no one can eat of it, and it's completely holy. But after it's sprinkled, we look at it a little different, and we say it's permitted. We don't grab the main part. I guess because of the Bechor, the idea is that eventually it is going to be food. The primary intent in a free will offering is that or peace offering is that you're offering something to God, that you get to party down a little with it after. That's a nice bonus. But when it comes to the Bechor, the whole intent is that the priest should enjoy it and it should be permitted to him. So once the blood has been sprinkled, it's completely profane. The ultimate intent is that it should reach this point, whereas by the Shlami, the ultimate intent was more that the parts that went up to God. That's a pirush from me. I hope that's right. I don't have any notes here. I'm learning out of the Chayenu. If I add the Rabbi Tauger set, I could probably see a little better, but I don't have it in front of me. But for further reference, but that makes sense to me, so we're going to run with that for now. Hopefully that's right. Hopefully the Rebbe will validate. Tes Zayin Yesh Makom Anshehem Yilgim. There's places where people don't speak so properly. Umafsidin esalation, umachanin al davar achar. They have little slang, I guess. Slang. They have a certain local jargon that they use to refer to different things. When it comes to those places, then we follow the way it's used in that place. If in this place they call a dime a bucket, then when the person says a bucket, we know he means a dime, or whatever it is. You kind of know when you live in a certain place, people use words a certain way, and we follow after the local meaning. Ketzad kol kinu carbon. Anything that's a nickname for a carbon, it counts as a carbon. Homer Hariain, like kuna's a bunch of nicknames. Hari elu kinui carbon, those all count. Cheref hari elu kinui cherem. Those are nicknames for a dedication offering. Then we go after the language used for the people who live there. If they use these nicknames, then it's like an offering and it will be forbidden to him. And if they don't, then it's still okay. Logically, it's all right. Yud Zayin ukashem she'asar atzmo b'chnuyin kach im hikdish b'chnuyin harizah hekdish b'chnuyin chnuyin mutarin. Just as a nickname works for vows, it works for actually sanctifying the animal. If he wants to bring it as an offering, not that he's making a vow. But a nickname of a nickname doesn't bind him for either vows or consecration. See how this works. I don't know, a nickname of a nickname. I guess once you get 2 steps down the road, it doesn't count. If it has a known nickname and then people go have a further slang to have a nickname for the nickname, that would not be binding. On either case, to sanctify it or to make it a vow. Yudches, ha'omer l'chavero kol ma she'achal imcha, anything I imach eat with you, lo yeh chulin, it won't be profane, or lo yeh kosher, it's not kosher, or lo yeh dachai, it won't be pure, or lo yeh tahor. Harizeh kamisha amar. Oh, it's like somebody who said, Kol ma she'achal imcha chi yeh carbon. It's as if he said it's a carbon. Shehu asr, and it becomes asr. V'chein amar lo. Kol ma she'achal imcha tameh, or if he says everything you eat with you is impure, or noiser, or pigul, like we said earlier, or asr. So he could use the negative statement too, that it won't be like ordinary food, it won't be kosher, it won't be pure. All these things will be forbidden to him, and this language works. I'm not sure why will not be kosher would work, because we said earlier a person can't make something into a pig or an avela. I'll have to see. I'll have to make a point of getting the more in-depth Rambam for future lessons. Just trying to catch the general flow for now. Yud tes haomer l'chaver lo chulin lo achal lo ocholach. Somebody says to his friend, not ordinary food will I not eat from your property. Harzeh kamisha amar lo masha achalach lo yeh chulin. It's like he said it won't be profane. Al carbon will be a carbon. Carbon sha'achalach, carbon sha'achalach. And if he says the carbon that I eat with you, it's a carbon that I will eat with you, carbon sha'achalach, harzeh asar. All these languages are enough to forbid. Avalomer, our carbon lo ocholacha, but if he says a carbon that I won't eat with you, or carbon lo ocholach, or like a carbon I won't eat with you, or like carbon lo yocholach, or for a carbon that I won't eat with you, or carbon lo ocholach, or carbon that I won't eat with you, or low carbon lo ocholach, it's not a carbon that I won't eat with you. Kol elu matarin, all those are permitted. She'ein mashvadrarim elu ela shenishba. All we see from these words, the carbon shelo yachal zeh, is as if he's saying an oath on a sacrifice which isn't binding. Nishba carbon ein klum, or shenadar shelo yachal lo carbon. Or we could say he's taking a vow that he won't eat of a sacrifice with him. Alright, let's try to go through. These languages seem very similar to me, so let's figure out what the exact difference is. First he says, I won't eat any ordinary food. Alright, the ones that are binding seem similar to what we said earlier. How about the ones that aren't? The second case, it's more like he's taking an oath just that he won't eat with this guy. And an oath needs Hashem's name, so that doesn't work. Or we could just say that he could just say he's not going to have a sacrifice with him. But the other language was saying, if I do eat with you, it would be considered like this. So he made the food. But the first language is he made the food like a carbon. By the second one, he sort of just says he won't eat with him. He's more emphasizing just that he won't eat with this person, and he's strengthening his statement with the power of a carbon, which doesn't work. First one's on the food. The food becomes like a carbon. Second one says he's just emphasizing that he won't eat there. He's not talking about any certain food. He says, I won't eat there, and if I do, it's like a sacrifice. He's more taking a vow that he's more taking an oath that he won't eat, and he's trying to strengthen it. And this language doesn't work for an oath. But in the first few statements, it was all emphasis was the food itself, and saying the food would be like such an item, and that does work. Okay. Halacha chaf chulin she'achalach chulin she'achalach chulin she'achalach chulin she'lo'achalach chulin she'lo'achalach chulin she'lo'achalach harzeh mutar. Here's a bunch of phrases that don't work. Ordinary food, I will eat from your property. The ordinary food, I will eat from your property. Like ordinary food, I will eat from your property. Ordinary food, I will not eat from your property. The first few are pretty obvious because he's just saying it's like ordinary food, so that's no problem. The second, the latter one sounds like it's supposed to be an oath, but in the improper language. The ordinary food, I will not eat from your property. Like ordinary food, I will not eat from your property. It's permitted for me to eat from his property. Yeah, no, that all seems pretty simple. I'm not sure what the Rambam's saying there, why a person would think different. Chaf alef omer lo tame she'achalach. If a person says, I won't eat any impure sacrifices from your property, lo nosar lachalach, I won't eat notar, lo pigol she'achalach, I won't eat pigol, harizah asr. Those are all asr. Shemash v'shadavar she'achalach hu she'yeh pigol lo tame. Because the implication is that he seems to be saying anything he eats will be pigol or tame, lefichol lachalach. So therefore, he can't eat. So let's go through this quickly. No impure sacrifices will I eat from your property. So he's saying the food he eats is like impure sacrifice, or notar or pigol. It does have in his power to... He's emphasizing the food again. It seems to be saying the food becomes like any of these forbidden entities, which he has in his power to designate, and therefore it is a binding matter. It's very tricky, fine points, these languages, but we're getting there. We're going to work it out. The general rule is if he has in his power to forbid it, then it's going to be binding. He doesn't need Hashem's name, and he still has to say it the right way. He has to emphasize the item, it seems like, what he wants. Chaf base. Hechel she'achalach, hechel she'achalach, lo hechel she'achalach aser. Hechel she'lo achalach, hechel she'lo achalach, lo hechel she'lo achalach. Mutar shezeh k'mishnishba, hechel she'lo yachal, hechel yetzuzeh. If he says, here's three that work, by the temple I will eat from your property, the temple I will eat from your property, or no temple I will eat from your property, then it does work, because he's forbidding himself from eating, just like he can't eat from sacrifices. But if he says, the temple I will not eat from your property, like the temple I will not eat from your property, and the temple I will not eat from your property is permitted, because it's like he's vowing that he won't eat with his friend by the power of the temple, which would be an oath, and that doesn't work. Seems like the ones that work, he's emphasizing the positive aspect of what he's doing, the eating, and saying it should be like a holy thing. That works. But if he's emphasizing the not eating, and he wants it to be a vow, he has to do it in Hashem's name. Sometimes he uses a double negative, we'll reinterpret for him. It's hard to get it all exactly right. Okay, going weiter gegangen. It's not supposed to be such a long shir, although it's long today. Hav gimel homer levero mudar ani mimcha. If someone takes a vow from his friend, mashma davar zeh shelo davar imo. I think it means he won't speak with him. First ani mimcha, he says I'll separate himself from him. Mashma davar zeh, it implies this shelo yisav yitin imo, that he won't do business with him. Ruchach inimach, if he says mimcha, I'll be far from you. Mashma, what does that mean? Shelo yeshiv imo. Almost, he won't be within 6 feet of him. Instead, if he says, I think that I'm banned from you, yeah, that I'm ostracized from you, or mishamatna ani imach, or I'm banned from you, aval Im amalo mura ani mimcha. If he says, I take a vow from you, shelo yachalach, that I won't eat with you. Or I separate from you that I won't eat with you. That I'm far from you that I won't with you. Then you can't eat with him. And if he eats a gazayas, then he would be lashed. So another I have to be very careful with the language and see what the implications are. If he says, I'm taking a vow from you, it just means he won't speak with him. We'd still allow him to eat with him. If he says, I'm separate from you, it means he won't do business. Distant means he won't actually be physically close. Ostracized or banned also means he won't be physically close. But if he says, taking a vow from you that I won't eat, as soon as he brings in the eating, or he says, I'm far from you that I won't eat, I'm separate from you that I won't eat, or any of those things, those are effective languages to bring on a vow, and he would be lashed if he ate the kazayas, because he did say the word eat, so it has to be a biblical eating. Avdalid, Amar lo menuda ani lach shelo yachalach, eno ochalo, ve'im achal eno loke, Amar lo nideni mimcha harze asr la noisloi. But if we went through the first few from the previous halakha and said they would be binding, but apparently if he were to say, I'm ostracized from you and that I won't eat, he can't eat, but if he does, he won't get lashed. And if instead he says, I've drifted from you, then it's very strict. He's forbidden to benefit from him. Be nice to have a little bit of notes here. I'm not sure why those two are different. I'll try to check it up after class. Apologize, the class is a little bit lacking here. Just trying to get a feel for the flow. If he says it'll be like the vows of the wicked, if I eat with you, Shemidarim Nazir v'Karban Shavua, that they take oaths for Nazir and Karban Shavua v'Achal, and he eats, he's chayv v'chulan, he's obligated. V'chein Omar Harele Kinevos Kesherim, that I'm like a kosher free will offering. Shemiduvosam Nazir Karban Harz chayv. Let's see how this works. If he said, let it be considered for me like the vows of the wicked who make Nazirite vows for sacrifice, and oaths, if I eat from your property, if he eats, he's liable. And he's a Nazir if he eats. Or he's a Nazir anyway. But if he says, let it be considered for me like the pledges of the upright who make Nazirite pledges and donations for sacrifice, if I eat from your property, then he's also liable. I think in the first case, he actually Taka is a Nazirite. No, I think not until he eats. I'm sorry. Once he eats, I think he becomes a Nazirite. Since he has in his power to convey that status, then these are all effective languages. Chavvav, Amar Hari Alei Kanidr Shayin, says I'm like the vows of the wicked, or Kanivos Kesherim, or like the free will offerings of the righteous. She'achalach, that should eat with you, or im achalach, or if I eat with you, Hariza Asa, then he is forbidden. Afal Pishalo Farish, and then they didn't say it explicitly. Amar Kanidr Kesherim alone is Chayav Klum. If he says like the vows of the upright, then he's not obligated anything. She'ein Kesherim Nodrim B'derech Isser Cha'as, because people who are upright don't generally make vows of Isser and anger. Yeah, keep in mind, I guess it's important to keep in mind the human aspect. Always, Torah wants to bring peace between people, but if a person's saying this type of thing to his friend, what's the bottom line? He's going to be far from him. He's not going to eat with him. It's not such a nice thing. That's not a state we want Yidden in. We want Yidden together with Akdus and loving each other and getting along and everything good, Mashiach now. So if a person says, so that's more the traits that are associated with a wicked person. So if a person says, like the vows of the upright, an upright person will never vow such a thing. So then the food doesn't become forbidden to him. They don't, and generally these type of vows come out of anger, and upright don't get angry. So we see that a person is not obligated. Ari Kinidr Yishayim Hareini, Hari Nazir over Lefanav Chayv Naziros. If he says, I'm like the vows of the wicked, and a Nazirite walks in front of him, then he has to be a Nazirite. Kinidr Yishayim Alai Chayv Carbon. If he says, it's on me, the vows of the wicked, then he has to bring the sacrifice. If he says, like the vows of the wicked, he won't eat from him, he's liable for an oath. So let's see. If he says, I'm like the vows of the wicked, Nazarite is passing for him, he's obligated for a Nazarite vow. He says, I'm like the vow, it's also like the vows of the wicked, then he has to bring a sacrifice. Like the vows of the wicked, I will not eat from it, then he's liable for an oath. It's very interesting. Very sensitive and subtle language here to work it all out. I'm sure if we had the notes, it would be much clearer. Sorry I keep saying that. But anyway, this year is just to get a feel for Rambam and idea of oaths, and the person can forbid certain things to him that are permitted for the sake of strengthening his fear of heaven. Not to lose sight that we're doing this to give God pleasure, to hasten redemption, to be reunited, and the whole point is just to give Hashem some nachas and get the merit of learning Torah and strengthen the public that they'll want to learn Torah and they'll want to do more and bring the redemption. Amen. Chaf Zayin. Hanoder b'Torah. Somebody takes a vow by the Torah. He says, this fruit's like the Torah for me. That's meaningless. He doesn't have to even ask a sage. Unless he's an illiterate person. So that just so he won't, we'd ask the illiterate person to still please consult the sage, just because we don't want him to think that these vows are nothing, because he sees he said something, he wasn't obligated, and he can come to the conclusion that it's not such a big deal to make a vow, so that won't happen. Even though his vow was nothing, we would still ask him to consult the sage. So the Torah is very holy, but it doesn't come from his holiness. It's not a holiness that man can endow. The Torah's holiness comes from God. And it's also not referring to a sacrifice like all the words we used earlier, temple and chamber and all the different implements for the altar. Those are things that refer to holy offerings. The Torah is a teaching, a guide. So it's not intent to be separate. In fact, we should learn Torah every day like we're doing now. So the only exception is the Amorites. He does have to consult someone. But if he says the vow from what's written in the Torah, then it is aser. Shahari kasuba isra v'neder, because the pasukim, the verses about vows and oaths are in there. So it's as if he's using that. Not tlabiyado v'nader ba. If he holds it in his hand and he takes a neder, harzekamisha nader mamash kasuba. That would, we look at it as if he was referring to the writing. In which case we'd say he's referring to the verses that discuss this topic and say he has it in his power to forbid these things, and we would consider them to be asur to him. Chavtes Omer L'Chavero Nashkim V'Nishne Perek Alav L'Chashkim Olishnosh. Second one neder hu, that's like a neder. Af Opi Shalo Hotzi Beloshen neder. If somebody says let's go study a chapter of Torah, he has to go do it. Even though he didn't use the vow language, it's like a vow. That's very interesting. If he tells his friend he's going to learn Torah, better go do it. It's pretty serious. All right, halacha lamed, last halacha. Omer leishto, someone who says to his wife, Hariata like imi, you're like my mom, or ka'osi, like my sister, or ka'arla, or like forbidden species, or kilai karim, or like the kilai karim, other forbidden species. Orla's the first 3 years worth of produce on a tree, which is forbidden entirely, even for benefit. Or kilai karim is mixed species in the vineyard also. Haizek Omar ala peros. It's like you said about these fruits. It's like you said that they're like a pig. And just like using the language pig wasn't effective, so too none of these languages are effective. He can't turn his wife into his sister, his mom, and he can't turn his wife into Orla or Kilayim. So it's as if he said nothing. But if he said to her, Reini mudar mimcha, but if he says, I'm separate from you from benefit, or nas tashmisha chasur alai, or the pleasure of relations I won't take from you, harzasur alav, then it's asur kamosh bar. Because now the vow is going on the pleasure, not on her. So there's some interesting notes here. Conjugal rights are actually The Torah wrote it in for the wife. Those are actually there for the wife. So a person might ask, if those are her rights, how could he swear against it? But notice he didn't say that he wouldn't have relations. He says he's forbidding pleasure. So even though he's obligated to give her conjugal rights, he's not allowed to forbid himself. But still, since the vow involves satisfaction that he could forbid, it also includes this. So he made it on a lot of things that he could forbid, and he encompassed her also and their relations, because that's pleasurable to him. So that got out too. Be interesting to see what the law would be if he said specifically that. And then, oh, he did. Well, that was the last statement. How does this work? Because he didn't technically forbid relations, but the satisfaction. Alright, so he can't take a netter against the relations themselves, but against the pleasure he could, since the pleasure, so to speak, within his parameters. That's within his will. He can't take the relations away, but the pleasure he could take away. So in these senses, the vow is binding. It's an interesting idea. It's within his power. So with that, we conclude the first chapter. Shigo Machal L'Chayil. And know only good things. Should be blessed in Gashmis and Ruchnis, and we shall have Mashiach now.